Thank you guys. Hi guys, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Professor Vicentini, for inviting me. It's an honor. Like Monica said, I'm going to talk to you guys about comic books, and especially Brazilian comic books, since we're focusing on this course. I sound like I'm the teacher with you, right? You're focusing on Brazilian culture and history. And many times, some things are forgotten. I know you don't have enough time to talk about everything in Brazil or every kind of entertainment or art made in Brazil, I know. But usually when you get like a hierarchy of things you're going to talk about, it's literature, poetry, movies. Brazil has a huge TV production, a lot of TV shows, and comics. We usually forget about comics because mostly, and I'm talking about Brazil here, but I guess the same kind of perception might be real in the United States. I don't think it's the case like in Japan, for example, or in like France, Belgium. But usually comics are something you associate with kids and nerds. That's wrong. It's kids, nerds, and everybody else. Okay? So, first of all, it's a language. It's a way of communicating, expressing. It's a way of telling stories, just like movies and like books. So, of course, it was generally associated with kids because it was originally made for kids. It's usually very juvenile. But since that time, comics have evolved to become much more. As movies did, as TV did, as books and video games and board games. All of those things are like vast universes that we can explore. It's not just the tip of the iceberg. Okay? So, let's talk about comics. Okay, so yeah. I drew this when I was a little bit younger, okay, so my beard was not as wide as it is now. So these are some covers of some of my work, some of my books. I have been making comics since at least 2002, and I haven't been drawing since I was a kid. So, like family legend says that I draw since I was 2 years old, and I never stop it. Thank God. So now I can be here talking to you guys about this. So I make comics because I love the medium, I love the language, I love the way we can associate words and images and graphic design and poetry and music and movies and everything in a kind of easy to understand form of communicating. Okay, let's see. First thing I need to know, actually before that, all the images you're going to see during this presentation are Brazilian artists, okay? So if, I don't know if you like something or you want to ask something or like names or stuff like that, I have a list by the end of the lecture of books you can find here in the US made by Brazilian authors. But anytime you want to ask something, just raise your hand or throw something at me, okay? I usually talk a lot, so you need to interrupt me, okay?
True.
True. She knows. Okay, first of all, who reads comics among you guys? Yeah, nice. Okay, so when I say comics, I mean superhero, comic strips, newspaper strips, webtoons, manga, manhwa. I mean European comics, I mean like fanzine, underground stuff, anything that is made by telling a story between drawings and texts, that's comics. Okay, so many people say like, I hear this a lot in Brazil. Oh, I don't read comics, I just read like these authors on Instagram. Okay, you're reading comics. But I don't read the books. no problem, you're reading comics. Or people who say, I don't read comics because I read manga. No, you're reading comics. Is there someone here who is more than a reader? Someone that makes comics, draws or writes, or wants to, or writes about comics, or has a podcast, or has a YouTube channel, or is secretly a Marvel comics artist in disguise? No? Okay? Okay, no problem. What is comics? Okay, so first of all, let's talk a little bit about this comic strip right here. This is a comic strip by Mauricio de Souza. I'm going to talk more about this guy because he's really, really important for Brazilian comics. And this is a very, very historical, important comic book strip. It was published in a newspaper in 1960 something, 64, I guess. And it was the first appearance of this character, this right here. Remember this angry girl. She's going to be very important. Also, she has the most beautiful name in the world. Do you guys try to guess her name?
Monica.
Yeah. So this is Monica. She is one of the most famous characters by Mauricio de Souza. Okay, this is the very first appearance of the character. She doesn't have a name here. She's not called by name, but she would eventually be named Monica, and would like lead Mauritius' work to stardom. But we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. But first of all, when we say comics, and we're like in saying comics, we're saying like newspaper strips and manga and all of those things. What are they? How can we say like this is comics, this is not comics? Also, why are they called comics if they're not? They don't need to be funny anymore. Any guesses? What makes a comic comic? No. You guys know it. You're just shy.
I guess like any storytelling in form of a series of pictures. It's short.
That works. Yeah, that works. Drawn pictures. Yeah, but then actually we could have like a whole semester. She won't let me do it, but we could have like a whole semester talking about what comics can be. They can be a lot of things. We can make comic books with photographs, and with typography, and with like graphs. We can. Why not? So it's kind of easier to say what is not comics. But when we're talking about, like you said, like a deliberate sequence of images, many times with the help of text, but text, it comes in a form of like a graphic way of visualizing sound. So the word balloons are not actually banners floating around the characters. They're like, okay, sometimes they can be. I've read comics where they take the word balloon and hit the other character with the balloon. So it can be done. But usually it's this. We have like panels with drawings. Sometimes they have text, and they are positioned in a deliberate order for you to read. And the most important thing here is something we don't even see. I love this part. It's the gap between the panels. This right here is the most important thing in comics. Why? Why am I being so existential, so surrealistic? Well, guys, we can see what's happening in the panels, right? But we can't see what happened between panels. The magic of the medium, the language, is that you, as a reader, each of you will make a conclusion of what happens in this interval, in this gap, based on what you see here first and what you see next. Nobody's telling you guys what happens from here to here, but we can see the angry girl hits the spike-haired boy, then she left and he sat down. but we don't see him sitting down. We don't see her leaving. We just know that she did because there are visual clues for that. Okay, it can be much more than that. It can be super experimental, but basically it's this. I'm going to translate the script for you guys. You have to know that this guy here is the star of this series. His name is Cebolinha, which literally means little onion. And also, actually, Cebolinha is the diminutive of cebola, which is onion, but it also means scallion. So either way, it represents his head with the spiky hair, okay? He's kind of this very intelligent and very, like a brat, very intelligent, very mischievous, and he always wants to, take advantage and be the ruler of the gang, of the street, as he says. So here he's trying to balance on the curbside. He's saying, oh, cool, I'm gonna see how many miles I can walk like this. And then, get out of my way, girl. He says equilibrista, which is like the person who walks a wire, like, what's the name of that again? I always forget. Like slacklining, Move out of my way, girl, leave me, whatever. And then she hits him. She's very angry. And then he says, now I know how a girl can destabilize a man. Or take the balance out of a man. So that's it. Okay, let's go. Here are some of my pages. There's black and white, there's cartoony, there's more realistic, there is like digital coloring, there is watercolor, there is drama, humor, horror, historical, there's a lot of stuff. So when we talk about comics, we can't restrain our perception to just one genre of stories, or one style of drawing, or one way of coloring it. It's infinite. So maybe, I don't read comics because comics are for kids. Okay, so try to find comics for adults. I really like, let's say, Victorian age romances. Okay, so go find a comic about that. There is comics about that. Actually, there are adaptations of Jane Austen, for example. Just have to find it. And comics are like this nest of new ideas. A lot of the movies and TV series and video games that you guys see nowadays, they are based on comic books. For example, Umbrella Academy, the TV series from Netflix, is based on a comic book co-created by a Brazilian. And things like that. Of course, Spider-Man is based on comic books, but sometimes you just don't know that, like, the end of the fucking world, sorry for the bad, but also a series in Netflix based on a comic book. Walking Dead, yeah, Walking Dead was based on a comic book. Yeah, we could like be the whole afternoon here naming movies and video games and stuff like that, but what we need to know is that whatever kind of story or narrative or style you like, you will find a comic book about it somewhere. It might be Brazilian, it might be Korean, it might be Russian, it might be American, but you will find it. Maybe you have to pay for it. Maybe you read it for free on Webtoons. Or maybe you're going to pirate it. Okay? No problem. Comics are universal. You can be anywhere in the world and you will understand the language of comics. So this is a strip by Elo D'Angelo. She's very famous in Brazil right now. Also, this is a strip from a book she just published about body positivity. And she makes a lot of comics based on like her view of the world, like feminism and body positivity and gender fluidity and things like that. She's really famous and she's super nice. This comic's from a book that she recently published, and it was the first comic book HarperCollins published in Brazil. So she started the whole comic book line from HarperCollins, which is like a huge publishing house. So we all can understand this. We all can understand the idea of her loving herself, because there is like her reflection is coming out of the mirror and they are hugging, they are happy. You don't need text, and you don't need a lot of context. You could argue that nobody can go out of a mirror. You can just like summon your own reflection from a mirror. I know, but people can fly either, and Superman is flying, so whatever. You know, you just understand the message behind it all. It is universal for readers, and it is universal for creators. So some people say, "Oh, I could never make a comic book because I can't draw." Dude, draw stick figures. That's a comic. That's like narrating your story through images and text.
Or only balloons.
Or only balloons. Yeah. A friend of mine, I love I don't have it to show to you guys, sorry, but a friend of mine, he's a writer and he doesn't know how to draw. And he wanted to start publishing comic strips, like comic strips. And I can't get an artist. He started making the strips only with the word balloon. So there were like 3 panels, 4 panels with just the text. And then he would show you how to better understand the jokes by changing the color of the text, the shape of the word balloon. You know, because there's like regular talking voice, screaming voice, thought balloon, whispering. He would change the balloon to change the volume of the voice. He would change the font in the balloon to change the kind of voice the character has. And he would change the color of the background. So when a character like said something really angry, the background would be just red. And when he calms down, the background would be gray or light blue. So he would use the resource he had, words and the language and the vocabulary of comics to tell his jokes. And it's worked. The series was called Mil Palavras, which means 1,000 words. Because, well, 1,000 words and an image, what's the same? An image is worth more than 1,000 words?
I think so.
I guess. Well, okay. Anyway, comics are universal. So if you have an idea, if you want to make comics or read comics or go after comics, just do it. There's no gatekeepers. Actually, there are a lot of stupid people out there, but anyway. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you guys about História em Quadrinhos. This is how we call comic books in Brazil. There are other names, but mainly História em Quadrinhos, which literally means stories in frames. Quadrinho would mean little square or a little frame, and we have a distinction here in English, stories and history. But in Brazil, we use história for both. So it is history, it is story. Okay. You can make history in frames too. It's a clever way of calling comics because they are actually stories being told in a sequence of frames. So it works. But also we call comics Ishibit. This is a popular term. It's like saying kind of a slang word for comic books. And it has like a funny and weird history behind it. Okay, so back in I'm just guessing here, but back in 1930, 40, 60, 70s, there was this magazine called Ishibit. It was an anthology magazine publishing Brazilian comics, but mostly imported comics. So they had like, I don't know if you guys can see, but this is Captain Marvel, the first Captain Marvel, not Carol Danvers, but Billy Batson. Okay, I'm too nerdy right now, sorry. But Shazam. We have here Flash Gordon, we have Popeye, Alley-Oop, we have Beetle Bailey, Haggard the Horrible, Peanuts, The Spirit, stuff like that. So they would like get the rights to publish in Brazil the comics that were being made abroad and published in Ishibit. So Gibi actually is a very old word from Portuguese that means that is like a slang for a little black kid. And the mascot of the comic was a little black boy, drawn in a ridiculously stereotypical and racist way. But you gotta remember it was 1930. Sucks, but it took a long time for them to drop the mascot, but the name stuck. So most people in Brazil will understand Gibi not as a racist slang, but as comics. So you go to the store to buy your Gibis. That's it. I'm very thankful that we stole this word and made it mean something better. But we also say gibizinho, we say revistinha, we say revista, we say HQ, which is HQ, the initials for História em Quadrinhos. But usually GB is more popular. Okay. This magazine doesn't exist anymore, so it's long gone, and the name is still with us. But the thing is, we're talking about Brazilian comics here. What makes a comic Brazilian? And what do you think?
Well, I assume it means my first thought would be made by a Brazilian author, artist, because like obviously the content could be like anything, like you said, like it can even be like an arbitrary event, you know, that could be kind of reproduced anywhere in the world. But like what makes it Brazilian is the fact that it was made by a Brazilian author. Obviously, of course, there are comics I'm sure that have Brazilian culture within it. That
Also
make it that. But I would take the first and foremost like part would be this life.
Yeah, I guess we can all agree that it works. Yeah, it's actually pretty straight to the point. If it's made by Brazilian. If it's made in Brazil, it works too. If it depicts Brazilian culture in some way, or Brazilian historical facts, or Brazilian, I don't know, literary classics being adapted, you could say, okay, that's Brazilian comics. But I mean, we live in a globalized world. Everything is everywhere, and we have like manga artists making manga in France. But are they manga for being France? Because, okay, I'll try not to get too technical, but every manga is a comic book, but not all comic books are manga. So every Brazilian comic book is a comic book, but you know. So we have Brazilian artists making comics for the international market. We have a lot of Brazilians drawing for Marvel and DC and Dark Horse and Image. And we have Brazilians drawing to the Japanese industry also. But usually the combination of geography and the culture that you're depicting and the nationality of the authors would make a comic book Brazilian, but never the aesthetics. Usually not the themes or actually maybe the geography that you show. You know, you are in Brazil making comics, but you're drawing like a fantasy land. It's not in Brazil, it's not anywhere, but it's still Brazilian. It's really hard to determine what makes a comic book Brazilian, aside from being made in Brazil by Brazilians. And that's like an important point for us to understand, because there's no anchor to it.
When I see my Korean like comics, because like I feel like it is made for Koreans, because like there's like Korean culture that we that only Korean can understand, and only we see in our daily life. So it is for ours. So I think Brazilian comics are more for Brazilians. Like so they will see what they hear from their parents or their ancestors, and what have they like experienced in their daily lives. What like it's I mean like it's not made for the Brazilian, but like it's more easier for Brazilian to understand and more like be into the comics. I think that's what makes the comic Brazilian.
Yeah, it really works. Some comics, Brazilian comics, they really have like a learning curve. So sometimes you need to know more about Brazil to get a better understanding of that comic. The same way in Korea, same way everywhere. But the funny thing is, in Brazil, we're very used to consuming international art and entertainment. So we probably know more about Korean culture by comics and like BTS and K dramas. Oh no, what's the name? Doramas,
Yeah.
and stuff like that, because people are consuming it a lot. Uh, we also know a lot about the North American way of life and culture and stuff because we watched Friends. I mean, we grew up watching Friends and I don't know, Jurassic Park and Disney movies. So we know a lot about what's outside, and that makes like I wanna like make a parenthesis here for you guys. There are superhero comics in Brazil. There are people drawing like the Japanese artists draw. There are comics in Brazil that we could say like they look like European comics, and that's because we consume that. We read a lot of manga, so it's easy for a young author, a young artist to want to draw in the same style as their heroes do. You know, what happens is we're making like weird Frankenstein monsters of comics, because most of Brazilian superhero comics they write and draw the superheroes as if they were American superheroes, and American superheroes don't work in Brazil. I mean, they don't work here too, because well, 2023, nobody believes a guy with a colorful spandex flying around and being super heroic. But anyway, you know, it's cultural. But anyway, all of this is Brazilian comics and more. We have a lot to show for you guys, but let's move on. So, a little bit of histories in small frames. I want to talk to you guys about a couple of people that are really, really, really important for Brazilian comics. I mean, if you had to take like this 1 hour crash course on Brazilian comics, I would have to name this guy. First of all, this drawing is by Flavio Carneiro. He's no longer with us, he's already deceased, but he was one of the greatest comic book authors from the 70s to the 90s, more or less. He was very active, and he was mostly forgotten by the younger generations. Mostly because we consume a lot of international IPs and stuff like that, of course, but also because we have a bad habit of not celebrating our own history, our own heroes, in comics especially, okay? He's being like brought back, especially because of comic book publishing houses in Brazil. They're like getting all his old books and republishing it. So there's been like a Flavio Carneiro renaissance in Brazil, and I'm very happy because he deserves it. So, but I'm not going to talk, ironically, I'm not going to talk about Flavio Carneiro for you guys. I'm going to start with Angelo Agostini, actually. This guy, born in 1843 and deceased in 1910, is mostly known as the father of as the father of Brazilian comics. Ironically, he's Italian. How come? Okay, you guys know there's a lot of immigration in Brazil. The Italians went to Brazil during this period, okay? And Agostini went to Brazil. He was young, and he was a journalist and an illustrator, an artist, and he was an advocate for, like, I would say entertainment. So he had newspapers. He founded the first and most important newspaper dedicated to kids in Brazil called O Tico Tico. Lasted like for almost a century. He didn't last for almost a century, but his work did. But the thing is, we regard this guy as the father of Brazilian comics because of this comic strip. This is accepted by everybody in Brazil, for people who study comics and journalists and stuff like that, that this is the first modern conception of comics ever published in Brazil. So I have the dates here. It is 1869. 1869, guys. It was a long time ago. So this was published back then. It is a deliberate sequence of images telling a story with the help of text. And the text is not necessarily describing the image, but complementing the images with the words they're saying or some kind of joke. And it's called Aventuras de Zakaipura, which means Adventures of Zakaipura is the character. So this is the first Brazilian comic that we have like a registry that we have documented. But depends on where you ask, where the first comic ever was made. Some people would argue that the first comic book ever made, the first graphic storytelling ever made, was in the caves. Maybe they're right, because they are a deliberate sequence of drawn images telling a story. But let's say modern age, printed, okay, with the balloons and the panels. Some people would advocate, like especially here in the US, that Yellow Kid by Richard Felton Oldcott is the first first modern comic book in history in the world. Okay, and kind of course, they would believe that because they are American, so America first. But the first Yellow Kid comic that they believe is the first ever modern day comic book, blah 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 blah, is from 1896, and Zakaipura was published in 69. So we can do the math. Okay, I believe Agostini came first, but I know that Yellow Kid had a different conception of publishing a comic book, because the markets, the industry, the publishing business was a little bit different. And culturally, it's a little bit different. But Zakaipura was first. Okay, we won. But we also, through history, like I told you guys, we watch a lot of American TV, American movies, American everything, music, and we also read a lot of American comics. So these are a few covers. This is the first appearance of Superman in a Brazilian comic. This is like 1930 something, or 1940 something. This is the first appearance of Captain America in a Brazilian comic. One of the first appearances of Shazam and of the Phantom. You guys know this guy? The Phantom? No. It's because it's really old. It's really, really old. The Phantom was created, I guess, in the late 30s, like 1937, 8, next to Batman. And there's a curiosity here that you see he's wearing this red uniform, but Brazil is the only place in the world, as far as I know, where the Phantom wears red, because his original clothing is purple. You guys have any guesses on why the Phantom wears red in Brazil? Yes. Also, crappy printing. Not just cheaper, but because Brazilian printing methods back then were not as good, and it was easier and cheaper to make red instead of purple. And every time they tried to print purple, it would look like a muddy gray, so they gave up. So this character, he's red in Brazil, and everybody knows the Phantom wearing red, but he wears purple. Also, another curiosity is, sometimes when the Brazilian publishers, they ran out of American comics to publish, to translate and publish, they would like start making their own, like X-Men. This is a recently published book. It looks old because it's really old, it's from the 60s. X-Men were published in Brazil, and then they ran out of comics, and then they just let the guys in Brazil start making X-Men comics. And they're really weird. It's not like Marvel let them, licensed them. They just did it. You know, the Brazilian publishers thought, do stuff. So they did like Nick Fury, they did the Avengers, they did the X-Men, like creating these stories in Brazil. This is not canon. This is not also easy to find, and it's not legal also. But I don't know, they managed to republish this recently in Brazil, and I think it's hilarious. But comics have been like imported and translated in Brazil since forever. But we also make our own comics, of course. Agostini was there. So we also have superheroes. And we also have comics, like comical comics, funny comics. This is Raio Negro, translates to Black Bolt or Black Lightning. He's kind of a Green Lantern type of guy. He has an energy ring. He was also a fighter pilot. Maybe there's a bit of copyright issues there. But, this is Judoka as the judo master. I love his outfit. This is Capitão Guitarra, which would mean like Captain Guitar. They're all from like the 60s and 70s, so they're really old. These are Reco Reco, Bolão, and Azeitona. They are like three rascals, mischievous kids doing whatever. And this guy is funny because his name is O Amigo da Onça. O Amigo da Onça translates literally to the friend of the jaguar. You know that Brazilian jaguar, the white with the yellow with the black dots? So, the friend of the jaguar. Why is it called the friend of the jaguar? So, the thing is, it's an expression in Brazil. When you say somebody is the friend of a jaguar, it means that they are very, what's the term I used? It's a person who likes to take advantage of others. Who would like...
You can't trust.
You couldn't trust a person like that. He would always have their own interests first. And all of his comics and cartoons were about him taking advantage of somebody else and being extremely sarcastic about it. So, the friend of the jaguar. We have many more, but yeah. We have to talk about like the great medallions, the great names, the biggest authors in Brazil. And I'm gonna start with the biggest of them all, Maurice de Souza. Do you remember that angry girl back there who shares a name with our beloved teacher? This is her. This is Monica. Maurice de Souza, born in 1935, is still active, is still doing a million things, but not drawing or writing. He's like a businessman right now. He created basically an empire. We could easily say that he is our Walt Disney or our Osamu Tezuka. He is the greatest cartoonist ever in Brazil. Not just because he was good at drawing or writing, but because what he could accomplish with his work. It's not easy in Brazil to become as big as this guy became. He's everywhere. His creations are everywhere. Like Monica's Gang, everybody knows Monica's Gang. Everybody learns to read with Monica's comic books. It's uncanny. He also made an empire by licensing the characters to products, toys, TV shows, cartoons, video games, board games, clothing, diapers. Baby Monica diapers are very famous in Brazil. Monica's ramen is famous in Brazil. Monica's apples are famous in Brazil. You know, so maybe if you get like somebody, I'm not a parameter because I am a comic book enthusiast, but everybody, if you talk to people in Brazil, anybody, do you know Turma da Mônica? Do you know Monica's Gang? Everybody does. They might not still read the comics, but they know about the characters. And they have
Maybe that's why they think it's a kid's thing, right?
Exactly, yeah. In Brazil, it's very common for people to associate comics to children because of Monica's Gang's comics. They are everywhere. They are very culturally relevant. So they kind of became almost a synonymous to comic books in Brazil. And Mauricio is the head of it all. This is Mauricio's first published comic book strip in 1959. So we have like this kind of politician guy making a speech and very angry and just waving his hands. and people start going away, and then he gets frustrated and goes away, and then the boy rescues his dog, who was under the box the whole time. Okay, so this boy is Franjinha. In English, he's usually called Franklin, and the dog is Bidu. In English, he's called Blue because he's blue. So this was the first comic book published by Mauricio, and from this point on, he would just expand and grow and expand and grow and be more and more relevant, creating new characters and gaining space in other medias too. This is Monica's first comic book as a title character from 1970. Their comics are still being published in Brazil, and the design has evolved, as you can see. That's more recent. Just so you know, in numbers, in 2022, the company Mauricio de Souza Productions sold more than 12 million comic books and more than 2 million books in Brazil. The character Monica is, in this year, celebrating 60 years. And she was based on Mauricio's own daughter, who is kind of like, she's like a partner in administration in his production company. All the family is involved.
Who is also Monica.
Yeah, she's called Monica, of course. Yeah. So let me introduce you to these guys. Have you ever seen these characters anywhere? No. Monica's gang is so powerful. They are published in Japan, in Korea, in China, in Russia, in Indonesia, in South Africa, in Mexico. They have comics in English, but I don't know if you can find it here or if they're like made in Brazil for people to learn how to talk in English or to read in English. But they're really, really, really a cultural phenomenon. This guy on the left is Cascão. His name in English is Smudge. And his main characteristics is that he doesn't like to take showers. He's afraid of water. So he's always kind of dirty and stinky, but he's like a very loyal friend, very brave. Monica is the leader of the gang. She is the queen of the street where they live. She has a blue rabbit, like a stuffed animal that she carries around everywhere. The name of the rabbit is Samson. And she uses Samson to beat the guys, to beat the boys, because they are always teasing her for being buck-toothed, for having big teeth, for being fat, and for being short. They're just being mean. But she's really brave, she's really strong, she's really determined. This guy, Cebolinha, remember him from the onion hair? In English, he's called Jimmy 5 because of the 5. How can you say one hair? A piece of hair? Strand. Yeah, he has 5. I did like this. Okay, he has 5. Okay, and he's like this evil genius, like a mini Lex Luthor, always making plans and trying to make schemes to gain the power of Monica for himself. And this is Maggie. She's Monica's best friend. She's Magali in Portuguese, but Maggie in English. And she eats a lot. She's always hungry. She can eat everything all the time. Guys, we grew up on this. This is like Brazilian comics in a nutshell would be this, but you know, it's so much more. But everybody knows Turma da Mônica, Monica's gang. Okay, but years and years and years and years of cultural relevancy and dominance. And in 2009, Mauricio celebrated his 50th year making comics. Or making comics, because he was already retired from creating the things, but also he was managing everything. So these 3 books were made as a celebration of his work. They're called the MSP50 Collection, MSP50 for Portuguese. It would be Mauricio de Souza por 50. Also Mauricio de Souza by 50 artists. So in each book, the editors would invite 50 authors from Brazil who makes comics and cartoons to pay a homage to Mauricio, like drawing his characters or making a little story about Mauricio. It was the first time in history where Mauricio allowed other artists to draw his characters in their styles. The first ever. Because he has a studio, they make a lot of comics every month, but they all draw in the house style, the one you saw in the last slide. But this was the first time that they allowed people to do that. People like me, and I drew this. This is part of my story, it's in the second book. So this is my version of the characters from Monica's gang. It was such an honor because if you think that in the entire territory of Brazil and everybody making comics, I was one of 150 invited to celebrate Mauritius, so I'm really honored for that. It was back in 2009, 2010, 2011. Okay, but they liked the idea of other people drawing the Turma da Mônica characters, so they started a new series called Graphic MSP. In this collection, each of these books is like a full-length graphic novel using characters from Maurice de Souza, but written and drawn in each of these artists' styles. It was a revolution. It was not only revolutionary because Mauricio was inviting artists to play with his toys, you know, but also nobody in the great public, the great audience, nobody knew these people. I mean, I knew them. Most of them are my friends. I know these guys and girls. But, I mean, Danilo Beirut, who now is drawing for Marvel, he was drawing the astronaut. And Vitor and Lu Cafage, their brother and sister duo, making the Monica Gang comic. It was groundbreaking because if you would go like to a newsstand or to a bookstore, you would find very easily this because they have a huge distribution system for these comics. So nobody knew about these authors, and now they are mainstream artists because of this series. But they were all publishing their own work before that. So it's weird to know. I mean, it's just like you enjoy like an indie band, you really like them, but nobody knows about them. And then they are invited to open a show for U2 or Metallica or whatever, or Lady Gaga. Suddenly they're like, everybody knows about them. And you're like, oh, I knew them from before. I know, he's my friend. He lives next door. But it's huge. It's very, very important. And it makes the cycle it created is very important because they were making independent comics and graphic novels. Suddenly they are seen by many, 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 many more people. And these people might go back and read their other work, the work that is not Monica's gang. So the comic book market, welcomed a lot of people because of this series. It was very important. Okay, also, because of one of these graphic novels, the graphic novel of Vitor and Lu Cafage, we got the movie. So this was, believe it or not, Monica's Gang, they had like movies, but in animation, many times before. But this was the first time a live action production was made with the characters. It was a huge success. They made 2 movies and a TV series with this cast. They're now like almost adults because kids grow up, what can you do? But it was also groundbreaking, and it kind of allowed movie production companies and TV production companies to take a look at Brazilian comics again and say, wait, they have a lot of interesting stuff here. We could make a TV series out of it. We could make a movie. So things are moving, things are happening. There's a lot of new stuff coming up. One example of that is Ziraldo, this very fun-looking guy. He was born in 1932. He's still alive. And his creations, his comics are very much more intended for children, but he also made adult humor. His main creations were the Perere Gang, which is these guys here. There are characters that are animals from Brazil's fauna, indigenous people, and folklore characters. Have you heard of the Saci? No? Okay. So this is the Saci. He is like a very, very famous mythical creature in Brazil from the folklore. And he's one of the characters in Ziraldo's comics. And this little guy here is Ziraldo's like masterpiece, is the Nutty Kid. Nutting like, crazy. It's super fun. He's like a very hyperactive boy. And recently, since last year actually, you can watch his cartoon on Netflix. Yeah, there was like a very, very beautifully produced, yes, a beautifully produced cartoon of the Nutty Kid, and there is an English version. You can watch it in English. It's beautiful. I have some friends who work in the animation too. Then fast forward to the 80s. Okay, we're doing like time jumps here. But during the 80s, Brazil was, as you know, on the brink of social collapse because of the dictatorship. The dictatorship was like ending and democracy was almost returning. And it was a period of kind of the resurgence of the underground comics in Brazil. Underground in the sense that it was greedy, it was dirty, it was acid and dangerous and like politically incorrect. It was like getting all of the social unrest these guys had, and they started making comics about it. Making fun of Brazil, making fun of Brazilian people, making fun of everything. So these are some of the most famous magazines from the time. They sold like dozens of thousands of, maybe hundreds of thousands of copies every month. It's a lot for that time, especially. And among all these guys, we'll have to talk about Laerte. Laerte, born in 1951, is still alive, is still active. He's a trans woman cartoonist. She started her transition in the late 2000s. After almost 30 years making comics. And then she transitioned and she's still making comics. And I dare to say that Laerte is the greatest genius in Brazilian comics ever. Her work is extraordinary. From the comic strips she makes like of a little bird playing with words for kids, to like surrealistic and expressionists and existentialist comics. She also used her own transition and created a character who transitioned in comics before her. So she was like experimenting with the transition in a character, in a comic. It's incredible. Also, you guys could like try to find in Netflix. There is a documentary about Laerte. It's beautiful. In Portuguese, it's Laerte C, Laerte-SE. I don't know if you guys can find it here in the US, but it's a beautiful documentary. They will talk about her work, but also about her transition. And she's awesome. Love Laerte. And I wanted to show, like, if I had to show one piece of work by Laerte, it has to be this comic strip. It's the most famous strip by Laerte ever. But I will have to give you guys context. And I will ruin the joke for you guys, but I have to explain, otherwise it won't make any kind of sense. But we have this giant grooved coin floating in space, and it's falling to Earth. The text translates to the great coin. Sometime it will eventually fall or drop. So we have this coin is like a meteor coming to Earth. So the thing is, do you guys remember, like in old ages, when we had public phones, that we had to put coins in them to make calls? No? Ancient history. So here in the US, you would put like regular quarters and coins, like normal money. But in Brazil, it was this kind of coin. You had to buy it in places, like everywhere you could buy it, and they are like they have these grooves, so they would fit perfectly in the slot. So you would buy one of these coins. We call it ficha, but coin, maybe. What's the name? You know, in poker, the round pucks. What's the name of that? Chips. It's kind of a chip. Okay, so we could say coin, we could say chip, same thing. The thing is, in Brazil, we have a saying, very popular, that means, that is, cair a ficha. Cair a ficha means drop the coin, drop the chip, or, dropping the chip, things like that. So we use it like whenever you realize something very, very important. You just, the chip dropped, a ficha caiu. So like, I can be here and all of a sudden, cai a ficha that I am lecturing to students in a university in the US. Oh my God, that's a huge deal. Okay. So when we say that the chip has dropped or the coin has dropped, we mean realizing something massive, very important. So Laerte literally draws a giant chip floating in space, ready to crash on Earth as soon as we realize things. So it's kind of like saying, let it be. Sometime they will get it. Sometime they will realize it. Sometime we will realize it. Realize what? But when we do realize it, it's gonna be massive. So it's sublime. It's beautiful, it's funny, but it doesn't work in English. I'm so sorry, guys. But yeah, you have to believe me that it's genius. Then, by the 80s to the 90s, we had this phase in Brazilian comics that were made like an assembly line. Like every publishing house would have a studio, and they would hire writers, artists, colorists, and typography artists to make comics and sell the comics. And also this was the time of the celebrity crush, because many of these studio-made comics were based in celebrities in Brazil. For example, so this is Turma do Arrepio. It would be like the Goosebump gang. So they are like monsters, but they are cute and funny. This is Zé Carioca. Probably you guys heard of him. No? Yes. There is a very, very fun cartoon by Disney from the 40s or 50s, I guess. It's called The Three Caballeros. And there's another one called Bem-vindo a Bahia, Welcome to Bahia. And Donald Duck comes to Brazil and he meets Zé Carioca, and it's super fun. So he's a parrot, he's Carioca, he lives in Rio de Janeiro. And many, many, many Zé Carioca comics were made in Brazil by Brazilians, because who else would make a great Zé Carioca comic other than a Brazilian, right? So he's still being published in Brazil. This is the Little Ninja. He is a ninja and a kid and funny. And this is Captain Ninja. He's like kind of a funny superhero mentor to the Little Ninja. But we also have like celebrities. I don't know, have you guys ever heard of Xuxa? The Brazilian goddess of media? No? Okay, Xuxa is, she was a TV show host for kids, especially for kids. We grew up watching her and listening to her songs. She was really, really famous, and she still is very famous. She doesn't make TV shows for kids anymore, but yeah. This is Xuxa's comics. Do you guys have you guys heard of Ayrton Senna, the Formula One pilot who died tragically in 1994? One of the greatest athletes ever. Senna. This is Seninha, a character based on Ayrton Senna. These are Trapalhões. They are like a Monty Python kind of sketch comedy group. Also, their comics. What else? And this girl is from erotic comics. Anyways, so people were making comics about celebrities. They were making comics about popular characters and cartoons and history facts and political facts. Comics has always been made in Brazil. But what is really, really important for me, especially, is the indie revolution, starting in the early 2000s. It was kind of next to when I started making my own comics. I started making my comics in 2004, more or less. So, because of the economy, Brazilian culture, especially in comics, movies, and music, we always respond to it. You know, especially music. You know, music reflects, art usually reflects the times. And comics are no different. But usually, when there is an economic crisis, comics will be the first to fall. There will be less comics being published, less people being paid to make comics, less people buying comics. So it's like a roller coaster. Oh, we're great. Oh, we're bad. Oh, we're great. Oh, we're bad. So here we were good. Economy was good. Culture was good. Printing costs were cheaper. The internet allowed, with like early social media, allowed creators, authors, and readers to connect more. There were more publishing houses starting business and publishing comics, Brazilian comics and international comics. And crowdfunding started in Brazil. It was 2011 actually, the first crowdfunded comic in Brazil. Why is this important? Because until then, independent comics were made in a very small scale. People would like make some comics and they photocopy that and staple and just sell to the friends. Very local. When this started, people got to send their comics to other states, to other cities. We started having more Comic Cons. So people would travel to sell their comics and present their work to more people. So it started expanding. And also social media, you know how it works. So everybody was able to reach farther. This guy right here is the mascot for Quarto Mundo, which means fourth world. It was a independent comic book collective. I was part of it for most of its existence. And the idea was to unite independent creators, and we created like a distribution system. So I would be able to send my comics to all my friends and colleagues in other states, and they would be able to send their comics to me. So if you guys met me in a Comic Con, I would have like comics from all over Brazil to sell. It would be impossible, or nearly impossible before that. Eventually, it didn't work anymore because of a lot of reasons, so it doesn't exist anymore. Okay. What else? Independent. And then 2010 forward, the web revolution. Social media, webtoons, more crowdfunding, more Comic Cons, more sales, especially for the people who publish online. A lot of people appeared and gained a huge following without ever putting out a book, a printed book. Here are some examples just to show, but there are many, many more than this. So, where we are right now in Brazil is that we're coming out of a very, very bad experience in the last 4 years, especially economically speaking, because of the pandemic and the government. So, printing costs are up, a lot of newsstands closed, a lot of bookstores closed. But on the other hand, we have the indie production is higher than ever. There has never been so much comic books being published in Brazil than now, but we have the least amount of readers in history. It's weird. We have more being made and published and less people reading. So it's kind of a weird graph. What's happening? Oh, economy, and you have Netflix, you have webtoons, you have your cell phone, you have video games. Comics are kind of a bubble. Comics are niche. They are niche here too, but they are niche. But if you are inside it, it's a gigantic universe. Okay, give me quadrinhos. I would like to, do you have time?
Mhm.
Okay. I'm going to show you guys some reading suggestions that you can find here because they were published here in English, so it's easier. Okay, we have here a lot of different comic book characters from Brazil reading comics, and this guy is my character right here. So, first of all, we have Run For It by Marcelo de Salete. This book was published by Fantagraphics and won the Eisner Award recently. The Eisner Awards are the top awards for comics in the United States. And he won for Best Foreign Comic Book published in the US. Yes! Go Brazil! Yes! So, these are stories about enslaved people and their fight for freedom. Powerful material. Super cool, super great. Marcelo is also, aside from being an artist and a teacher, he's also a historian and a researcher. So he would research a lot of the history behind the quilombos, the enslaved people too. So he knows what he's talking about.
And this is the one we have here, right?
Yeah,
Library?
yeah. Run For It's available at Stony Brook's library. I don't know if it's in Portuguese or English, but probably English.
I think
Okay, next is Picture a Favela by André Diniz. André Diniz is a writer and illustrator, a dear friend. I made a book with him once too. This is the biography of the photographer Mauricio. So André will tell the story about this photographer from the favela, using his own style of drawing and Mauritius photos. It was published in Europe, like many countries in Europe. He won a lot of awards for that too. We have Meta, love this one. Also friends of mine. You see, it's a small world after all. This is super cool because it's the Department of Metalinguistic Crimes. And they are detectives that investigate crimes that are committed inside the stories. So in this story, they go inside a comic book to try to find the murderer of the creator of the comic book. But this is a comic book. See? It's super cool. Also, it's in this story that the character grabs the word balloon and hits the other with that. Vincent, originally in Brazil, he's called Valente, means brave, but then he's Vincent here. It's a comic book by Vitor Cafage. Vitor is one of the authors of that Monica's Gang graphic novel that became the movie. So he was making Vincent, he made the Monica's Gang comics, and the readers there went back to read Vincent. So the cycle continues. It's the story of this guy. He's a dog. He's fresh out of high school. He's a loser, but with a gigantic heart. And he likes RPG, he likes Star Wars, he likes Lord of the Rings. He's a super nerd, and he doesn't know how to talk to girls. And these are stories of how his heart is going to be broken many, many times. It's super cool, super beautiful. It was published by Super Genius here. Blessed Cure by my friend Mario Cesar is the story of Acácio. Acácio is a guy, he's going to go through a very difficult journey of coming out of the closet. The thing is, he denies it. He doesn't know he's gay, and then he knows, but he fights it, and then he doesn't want to admit it, and then he does. It's very, very dramatic because he's from a very religious family. And also, if you notice, you have the pink and the blue. The whole comic is colored only in pink and blue. And everything that is male, like straight guys, male, is blue. And everything that is female or straight woman or whatever, it's pink. And sometimes the colors will like match. And he will be wearing like a pink shirt with blue trousers. And then he's in the middle of the conflict. And sometimes it's purple. It's beautiful. Very sad also. Day Tripper. Please excuse me, this is not a journey, it's a journey. Okay. This is a very special comic book actually, because Evan said you're making comics in Brazil. You are Brazilian making comics in Brazil, It depicts the Brazilian culture. This is exactly that, but it was published first in the US. First here and then in Brazil. It's curious. It's the story of Brás. He's a writer, and in every chapter, it's going to be a spoiler, but it's on the first chapter, okay, so forgive me. He dies in the end of the first chapter, but then in the second chapter, he's alive, and he's older, and he kept living. So every chapter, you see him die in a different way and continue living. It's a story about life and death and love and trying to live up to your parents' expectations. Light stuff. Okay. Mesmo Delivery by Rafael Grampa it's like action packed, like a Tarantino movie. Two truck drivers are driving around to deliver a very dangerous cargo. That's all you need to know. And then there's a lot of blood. Also, the graphic design in this is phenomenal. Listen, Beautiful Marcia is the latest book by Marcelo Quintanilha, but the first book by Marcelo Quintanilha published in the US. He's like a major author, won a lot of prizes in Europe and Brazil. He lives in Spain nowadays, and this is a family drama. It's just that, like people trying to get along, people trying to understand each other. It's beautiful, it's sad, and it's so Brazilian. The dialogue is beautiful. The landscape, the backgrounds are beautiful. His style is very photographic, and in this book specifically, the drawing is realistic, but the coloring is like cartoony. But it's a great story also. The Few and Cursed, also by my friend Felipe Canho and Fabiano Neves, is a post-apocalyptic western. So the world ended, everything went to shambles, and people are riding horses and fighting demons with pistols. It's really cool also. Love Kills by Danilo Beirut is a story of love, death, and vampires. It's like not super genius, but if you like vampires and you like dramatic love stories with action, yes, this could be a movie. Probably will be in a few years, I don't know. Funny Creek is the story of this girl. She runs away from home and she escapes to the cartoon world of the shows she watches. And then she's interacting with these clowns and cartoon figures, but she's theoretically a real girl. It's very cool too. Necromorphos is also a very cool comic by my friends Gabriel Arraes and Abel. It's the story of Douglas. Douglas is like a teenage boy, and he has this weird power that if he touches any kind of body part of a dead person, he becomes that person. So I mean, if there's a story where he has like a piece of bone from like Mozart, I guess, or Beethoven, he becomes Beethoven. But with the mind of the boy. And it's really, really crazy stuff too. But also, if you guys like to read digital comics and you don't want to buy necessarily books, and if you can read in Portuguese or kind of risk or try, there is this new app called Functum. We nicknamed it the popsicle in a hat because of the mascot. It's like Webtoon. Okay, it's an app or a website, and you can access it and log in for free and read tons of Brazilian comics of all genres, styles, and whatever you want, you're gonna find them.
I have an idea. You can take my class next semester.
Yeah. And Functum was created by Guará, which is a publishing house from Brazil too. I'm part of Guará's artists team, so I was kind of involved in making some of their comics. Yes? Okay. To finish it all, I'm gonna leave you guys with this strip by Laerte. The guy is saying, "You are surrounded by ignorance, leave the book with hands up." So read more comics, guys. I really, really, really believe, I know that you're gonna find something interesting to read in comics. They're not just like people fighting or funny stuff or, I don't know, sci-fi. There's anything, any kind of theme or genre or style, not only in Brazil, but also worldwide. Take a chance. Think about like a movie you like or a genre you like or an art style you like. I'm sure you're gonna find a comic book right on that alley. Okay? I guess that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much.